Recently, I hosted a live virtual webinar on personal branding, and I have to say it went really well. So most of the time when I do corporate workshops or webinars, yeah, they go great. But in this one in particular, I could feel it was like I was vibing, and I could tell by the audience responses and interactions that they were getting a lot out of it too. During the webinar and after the webinar, I got a lot of positive feedback. For example, one woman sent me a message on LinkedIn almost immediately after, and she told me that she takes very seriously her whiteboard in her office. She has one of those dry erase whiteboards, and she was telling me that she takes very seriously what she puts up there. She puts her goals, she puts meeting notes up there, she puts follow-ups up there. And she said after the personal branding webinar that I led, she went up to her whiteboard and she erased everything and she replaced it with 4 words: be yourself on purpose. And then she sent me a photo and I was like, wow. A couple of hours later, I posted a video of the webinar on LinkedIn, and very soon after, in the comments, a senior executive whom I respect very much posted a hashtag. And the hashtag was #be yourself on purpose. And I thought, wow, there is something going on here. This idea of personal branding as being yourself on purpose seems to really resonate with people. And that's when I decided that these 4 words are probably worthy of an entire podcast episode. So we are going to double down on this idea of being yourself on purpose right here and right now. You're going to learn about what it means and how you can leverage this idea of being yourself on purpose to build your own strong, unique personal brand. Are you ready?
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Welcome to Talk About Talk podcast episode number 184. Be yourself on purpose. In this short episode, you are going to learn how to leverage the power of these 4 words, be yourself on purpose, in a way that will help you build a strong, unique personal brand for yourself. Before we go any further though, I'm just going to introduce myself. In case we haven't met, my name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and I'm an executive communication coach at Talk About Talk. Please just call me Andrea. I coach ambitious senior executives and aspiring senior executives to communicate with confidence and clarity so they can establish credibility and succeed in attaining their career goals. You can learn more about me if you go to talkabouttalk.com, where you can learn all about the one-on-one coaching that I do, the small group boot camps, the corporate workshops, the archive of this bi-weekly podcast, as well as my bi-weekly email newsletter. I really hope you'll sign up for that. And I really hope if you're on LinkedIn that you'll connect with me there if we're not connected already. All right, be yourself on purpose. Before we get into this, I think it's worth our time and attention to go back a little bit into the history of personal branding and some various definitions. I did run through some of this in another recent podcast episode, but I think it's just important that we start from the same foundation. Okay, so just quickly. In 1997, when I was a brand manager at Kraft Foods, I received a hard copy of the Fast Company magazine. Do you remember back when we used to get hard copies of magazines? They were kind of nice to leaf through, weren't they? The front cover of this particular issue in 1997 looked like the packaging for a box of Tide laundry detergent, except instead of the word Tide, it said You. And the headline on the front of the magazine was "The Brand Called You" by Tom Peters. I remember being in my office, receiving this magazine, closing the door, and sitting down and devouring this article. Tom Peters did not invent the term personal branding, but he really brought it into our popular corporate culture. What he was advocating is that we take what we know as strategic brand marketers, things that we apply to the products and the services that we're marketing, and we turn that and apply it to ourselves as personal branding. So whether it's your point of differentiation or your target market or your brand values, all of these things apply not just to products and services, but also to people. My brain exploded. I never forgot that moment. And fast forward many years, when I was teaching at Rotman in the MBA program, at the end of every semester, I would always dedicate one of the classes at the end to personal branding. And I would tell the students, everything that we've learned this semester about branding and about marketing, you can apply to yourself. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history from 1997. Fast forward many years, there's another definition of personal branding that you've probably heard. And this definition is from Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. He famously said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. This is a beautiful mental exercise that I take my clients through when I'm coaching them on their personal brands. In fact, I would say it was the definition that I was using for several years, but it's a great mental exercise. So ask yourself, what are your important stakeholders? Whether it's, your clients or your boss or your investors, whoever those important stakeholders are in your career, what are those people saying and thinking about you when you're not there? That is your brand. And by the way, if they're thinking and saying things that are a little different from what you wish they were saying and thinking, that's okay. That just means you have some work to do with your personal brand. And that's why we're here. So I referenced this definition, this mental exercise, if you want to call it that, from Jeff Bezos for many years. And then I interviewed Seth Godin for an episode of the Talk About Talk podcast. And we ended up talking about personal branding. I even asked him, Seth, do you think about your personal brand? That was one of my favorite conversations. When I asked him to define personal branding, he said something very eloquent. He said, your brand is what people think you're going to do next. I remember my brain exploding and I was thinking, wow. So it's not just what people are thinking and saying about you, but it's what they think you're going to do next. It's forward thinking as well. So here's what I now ask my clients to do. And yes, what I did for myself. I created a list of what do people conceive is possible that I'm going to do, or maybe probable that I'm going to do. And then a second list of what do I want to do. And then again, the work on your personal brand is on merging these lists. You want people to perceive it as possible that you're going to do the things that you want to do. In other words, you want your brand to match up with your goals or your objectives. Another fantastic and very productive mental exercise for you to do as you're working on developing your personal brand. So as I think about these two exercises though, so Jeff Bezos, what do people think and say about you when you're not in the room? And then Seth Godin, what do people think you're going to do next? The thing that's missing for me from these two definitions is this idea of agency. So what do I mean by this? Agency as in the control that you have. Agency as in the influence that you have over your brand. I mean, of anyone in the world, you are the one that has the most influence on your brand. And to me, these other two definitions, or I call them mental exercises, they're very sort of retroactive. It's what's happening based on your past. What are you doing in the future? So based on this thinking and this desire to, I guess, acquire some agency over our personal brands, I developed a different definition. And it is the title of this podcast episode. Personal branding is about being yourself on purpose. Personal branding is about being yourself on purpose. So while many of us go with the flow in our career, right? You graduate from college or university, you apply for a bunch of jobs, you get a job, you do what your boss says, you get promoted, maybe you change companies, things kind of happen to you. This is about taking some agency, some control, some influence, and exercising that over your personal brand, over your professional identity, over your reputation. So imagine what would happen if starting today, you started to exercise some of this agency over your brand. Before we get into this, how to exercise this agency, I want to first break down this definition into its two components. So the four words, be yourself on purpose, can actually be broken down into two themes here. One theme is being yourself, and the second theme is on purpose. I want to briefly describe what I mean by both of these. What I mean by being yourself is I mean being your true, authentic, yes, I said the A word, authentic, whole self. So you're not hiding parts of you. Of course, you're filtering what parts of you you're sharing depending on the context. This is a key part of personal branding. But you are always your true, authentic, whole self, and you are your best self. So there are a million ways of telling the same story, right? Even a million ways of telling the same story in a way that is true. So why not tell your story of your personal brand? Why not reinforce the good things, the strengths and the passions of yours in a positive way that are valid for you? So this is the be yourself part. It is about being your true self, your authentic self, and your best self. And it is about doing so on purpose. What do I mean by this? By on purpose, I mean unapologetically taking agency, having influence and control in a strategic and disciplined way about what you're sharing and what you're reinforcing in terms of your brand. So when I talk about being yourself, and I said it's your whole self, I was just coaching an amazing woman this morning on her personal brand, and we were talking about this, how we all have multiple roles in our lives. As humans, we are sophisticated, complicated, even messy beings, right? So she said, I'm a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a marketer, I'm a banking executive, I'm a thought leader, I'm an athlete, I'm a friend, I'm a book club member, and she went on and on and on. And I said, at no time will you be sharing all of these things with everyone, but these things are all part of your true self. This is the be yourself. You are always that same person. It's not that you are a different person when you're at work versus when you're talking to your parents or to your children or to your partner. You are the same person, but you will filter what parts of you that you share depending on the context and depending on the people that you're communicating with. This is the on purpose part. You are unapologetically, strategically, in a disciplined way, you are taking agency over your reputation and your brand. There's a metaphor here that can help you think this through. I first heard this from Ron Tite, who is an advertising executive here in Toronto. I interviewed him for my podcast. And actually, after he shared this metaphor with me, I heard it from a few other people. And I think that this is a really powerful metaphor. And it's the metaphor of your wardrobe. Yes, the clothing that you have hanging in your closet. So just imagine yourself for a minute, opening your closet door and looking at, all of the shirts and the sweaters and the pants and whatever you have in your wardrobe. You chose all of those things. They are authentically you, but you choose what elements of your wardrobe that you wear depending on, if it's Saturday afternoon and you're going to a movie with your partner, or whether it's Monday morning and you're going in for a regular day of internal meetings, or whether you're getting dressed up to go to an important networking event. You're going to dress differently for these different situations, for these different contexts, for the people that you're meeting with, but you're still authentic. This is part of being yourself on purpose. It's a beautiful metaphor. So whenever you feel like maybe you're not being authentic or you're not being your true self, I want you to dial back and think about this wardrobe metaphor as a way of kind of reconciling how you're presenting yourself. You are always the same person. You got those clothes that you're wearing out of the same wardrobe of clothing that you chose. You will present yourself differently. You will emphasize different strengths, different passions, different personality traits, different things about yourself in different contexts. Again, depending on the context and depending on the people that you're meeting with. But you are always yourself, okay? And again, the on purpose part, You have agency over how you're presenting yourself. So in addition to this wardrobe metaphor, I also want to share another thought about this definition of being yourself on purpose. And that is the idea that I recognize at the same time you are being both expansive and focused. So what do I mean by this? You are being expansive because you are always your whole authentic self with your multiple identities and roles that you have. You are always that same person. You are that expansive, authentic, whole person. However, you are consciously, strategically, in a disciplined way, focusing on what parts of your identity that you are sharing and communicating with the world. What parts of your identity or your brand are you reinforcing? Are you reinforcing your strengths and your passions, for example, in terms of your industry expertise, in terms of your functional expertise, maybe your marketing or maybe your finance or strategy, whatever it is, right? Maybe in terms of your specific leadership style, right? Are you a strong mentor? Are you a collaborative leader? What is your specific leadership style? These are all things that you can focus on. So I recognize it's like you're balancing between this idea of being expansive and focused at the same time. If it's feeling messy and awkward, you're probably doing it right. We are sophisticated and complicated and yes, messy human beings. And acknowledging that, and then again, taking the agency to focus on what parts of our identity, what strengths and what passions we really want to reinforce. This is where you can really get some traction. And you know what I hear from my clients all the time? I hear two things. I hear, Andrea, I have never thought about myself before in this strategic and disciplined way. And it's actually very satisfying. That's one thing that I hear. And then the second thing I hear is, it's incredible how with just a little bit of effort, I can make a massive, massive impact on my brand. I'm already internally feeling differently. I can tell that other people are interpreting me in a different and an improved way as well. So those are two pieces of feedback that I hear a lot, and I hope that they inspire you. So now that we've defined what I mean by being yourself on purpose, I want to share with you three different contexts where you can put this into action starting right now, okay? The first one, if you've been listening to the Talk About Talk podcast, is probably not going to surprise you, but it's with your self-introduction. So I coach people this framework, which is 3 points. You start with with the present, who you are, then you go to the past and you establish credibility by talking about your past, and then you make an enthusiastic statement about the future. So it's present, past, future. My challenge to you in this context of your self-introduction is to be yourself on purpose with every stage of your self-introduction. So here's the thing. Your self-introduction is the most direct way for you to reinforce, to take agency over your personal brand, right? These are your words from you, about you. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us just trivialize the self-introduction. It's like this awkward thing where we talk about ourselves for a minute and then we pass it on to the next person. My challenge to you is to be yourself, your best self, your true self on purpose. So thinking strategically, what are the things that I can mention in my self-introduction that are going to reinforce the things that are going to help me in this context with these people? So what parts of my brand do I want to communicate? And then make sure you nail them when you talk about the present. So here, this is what I do. This is how I do it. And then the past. Here are some things that I've done in the past. Make sure that they, again, reinforce the identity that you are strategically trying to reinforce. And then your future statement. So that is the first way to put this be yourself on purpose into action right now, is with the context of your self-introduction. The second context is when you're making comments in meetings. And by the way, this goes for whether you are the most senior person in your organization or the most senior person in the meeting, the person who probably is leading the meeting, whether you're, a middle manager or even whether you're brand new. There are a few prompts that I encourage my clients to use that can really help you here and that are really about being yourself on purpose. So here's my suggestion. Here's the prompt. There's some topic being discussed in the meeting, and there maybe is a decision to be made. An advertising agency says, here are 3 campaigns that we're suggesting, and we want to hear which one, your team believes we should go with. And they go around the table, and it's coming to you, and you've got to say something, right? Here's what I suggest you say. Based on my experience, or based on my expertise in blank, here's what I think. So you're not saying that you know everything, but you are saying based on your experience or based on your expertise. And if you can label your experience or your expertise, you could say, based on my experience last year managing this brand, or based on my expertise with consumer insights, I believe that option B is best because, right? So what you're doing is you are implicitly or maybe even explicitly reinforcing your expertise and your experience and your personal brand. So when you are making comments in meetings, pull your comments back to reinforce what your value add is. I remember one time I was in a hospital board meeting and people were discussing a certain topic. And I remember thinking, this is so far out of my league. Like, I don't really know how hospitals run. And then I thought to myself, Andrea, why are you here? You're here based on your business experience at teaching at a business school, strategy and brand marketing. Those are the 2 things where you have unique value, and that should be your brand in this meeting. And yes, I thought that consciously. And I raised my hand and I said, based on my experience and my expertise in brand marketing, my suggestion is this. This is why I recommend this. And here are some reasons why. 1, 2, 3. And I remember literally, physically seeing people in the meeting turning their chairs around and like raising their eyebrows like, oh, that is an interesting perspective that we wouldn't have had unless someone with that background and that expertise and that brand had raised her hand. So this is a second context where you can really reinforce your personal brand, where you can be yourself on purpose. When you're interjecting and making comments in meetings, you can reinforce your identity by explicitly articulating what your experience or your expertise is. Okay, so the first way to reinforce your personal brand is with your self-introduction. The second is with the comments that you're making in meetings. The third way that you can reinforce your personal brand and you can be yourself on purpose is through the stories that you're telling. Remember I said earlier, there are a million ways of telling the same story, even a million ways to tell this same story in a way that is true and authentic. So why not tell the story in a way that serves you? I catch people all the time when I'm coaching boot camps and I'm listening to their self-introductions and they say things that are just not quite as strong or positive as they could be, even in a way that's true. So I want you to really double down in a focused, strategic, and disciplined way on thinking about how the stories and even the phrases and the words that you're sharing with other people are being interpreted. Recently, I was coaching a gentleman who I'm coaching him on his professional identity and his personal brand. This gentleman is a rock star, and he has had a multi-decade career at the same organization where he very quickly went from like the most junior level all the way up to SVP. And recently at the SVP level, he ended up getting let go because he didn't see eye to eye with the CEO. So we were talking about how to create a narrative around this career transition that he's now experiencing. And he said something like, well, the CEO thinks that I blah, blah, blah. I said, hang on a second. Why don't you describe to me your people leadership style? And he said, I'm all about being very inclusive and supportive and making sure that everyone's on board. And I said, you lead through consensus. He said, yeah, I'm a consensus builder. And I said, so did your CEO have the same leadership style? He said, not at all. He's an authoritarian. He's a dictator. which is the opposite of, and that's basically why he let me go. And I said, listen, you have a very strong narrative. When you are sharing the story of what happened to you, especially with regards to this career transition, you need to reinforce your consensus style of leadership and how you didn't see eye to eye with this, frankly, toxic leader. You don't need to use those words with the current leader that you had. And then you say, so we decided to part ways because my leadership style and his leadership style just simply weren't compatible. And then you double down on explaining what your leadership style is and how it's worked in the past and how it can work in the future. Bam, right? So this is a fantastic example of how the way you tell your story can have a huge impact on your personal brand. Okay, so I hope you find that helpful. 3 different ways that you can be yourself on purpose, 3 specific ways. The first context is your self-introduction. The second is how you interject and make comments in meetings in a way that reinforces your experience and your expertise. And the third is how you tell stories, and particularly stories about yourself and maybe when you had career transition or maybe when you were leading a team, right? So what was your role? What are you taking credit for? Think very carefully about how you're telling the story, what phrases and what words you're using. I hope that breaking down these 4 words in terms of what they mean and in terms of various contexts where you can be yourself on purpose is inspiring for you. Here's my hope. I hope that you will write these 4 words down. You might write it down on the whiteboard in your office. You might write it down on a sheet of paper and stick it to the side of your laptop or your keyboard. You might write it at the top of your to-do list. Write it somewhere where you're going to be reminded constantly to be yourself on purpose. Be your true, authentic, best self on purpose. Exercise some agency. Unapologetically reinforce your strengths, your passions in a strategic and disciplined way. That is what personal branding is all about. If you're keen to get more coaching from me on personal branding, there's a few things that you can do. Like I said, if you go to talkabouttalk.com, there is a search bar at the top. If you search personal branding, you'll be able to access all of the podcast episodes and all of the newsletters that I've written on personal branding. So there's the podcast, there's the newsletter. I also do one-on-one coaching and I do boot camps on personal branding. So please check out the website there and you'll be able to see all the information. All right, that is it for this episode number 184. Now go and be yourself on purpose. Thanks for listening and talk soon.